Thank you, Carl, and the CRA, or as President Ronald Reagan said, the conscience of the Republican Party. Can you guys all hear me too? So anyway, it's good to be here. You know, on second thought, I'd rather say it's great to be out of Sacramento and with people who are normal. So thank you. Two things that we were told about when I was growing up, you guys have heard this, two subjects we shouldn't discuss: politics and religion, because it separates people, right? But yet, over the past 5,000 years of recorded history, the two ways men seem to either oppress other men and send them into 1,000 years of bondage or set them free are through those two institutions. Perhaps those are the two most important things to talk about, right? And so, I got two claps over there. Thank you. I'll pay you later. So, but here's another thing too. George Washington was asked, why the success and genius of America? Here's what he said. He said it's the first time in all of human history that the best of Jerusalem intersected Athens. What does that mean? Jerusalem, the home of religion, and Athens, the home of politics. So if it's good enough for George Washington, it's good enough for me, ladies and gentlemen. So, we're going to discuss a little bit about this. A guy who mentored me years ago when he was in California, he's now president of Hillsdale College, Dr. Larry Arnn, believes that you guys are an easy crowd. Most people are booing me, you know. Remember one lady said, throw the bum out, and I looked back and it was my wife, you know. So it's good being around this crowd. Thank you guys. You make me feel at home. And I'm only kidding about that and my wife. But anyway, Dr. Arnn believes we've entered the third great American crisis. Think about that. And that's whether we're going to survive and keep our constitutional way of government, which provides freedom to us as Americans, or if we're going to descend into a despotic government ruled by force and fear with an aggressive hostility towards people of faith and the free markets. Do we not see that happening today, ladies and gentlemen? So we live during some serious times. And so as people of faith, as parents and grandparents, our duty, as the wisdom of Solomon said, the parents' duty is to leave an inheritance to our children's children. And so I'm glad you guys are here, because that's what we're doing. It's about legacy and you know, that type of thing for future generations. And so it's a challenge because so many things are fractured today. Remember Nehemiah felt bad where he says the walls are down? Doesn't it feel like everything's sort of like that today? But there are challenges and solutions, and I'm only going to hit a few of the challenges today because most of you guys watch TV and you know the challenges, and I'd rather concentrate a little bit on some of the solutions. But so I want to give a caveat here. I do believe if we do certain things, there is hope. I believe God's for us, not against us, right? But we've got to be for him. So there is hope, but the caveat is I do think we're going to experience some rough seas along the way, but that just means we're going to have to ante up, and I believe probably in the spirit of the founders, we're going to have to do the same thing, and that's when they sign off that great declaration. They did so with a firm reliance upon the protection of divine providence. They mutually pledged each other their very lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And I do think perhaps we will be called to do that, but our country and our kids and our grandkids is certainly worth that, isn't it? Yeah. Amen. So a couple of things I think that have been a challenge for morality, and you can look at that whether you look at the ancient texts. We refer to the Old Testament. Morality was big, right? And God tells Moses, or Moses tells people, the children of Israel are going to the promised land over 50 times in those 34 chapters, that if you want peace and national prosperity, you have to follow those moral laws, decrees, and commands. And so we have not done that. You know, today it's kind of crazy because things sure have changed a lot. When I was growing up, we could ride our bikes all over town. My parents lived on a busy street and we left the doors unlocked. Who does that today, man? I'm thinking of putting an alligator moat around my house now, you know, with all the craziness going on. But Congressman Fisher Ames in 1805 says this, and I love it. He says, because he explains it. He says, all of history lies open for our warning, like a churchyard whose solemn lessons are chiseled into the hard stone of eternity. Lessons that thunder to republics, your passions and vices forbid you to be free. So we face some serious things. A couple of things I just want to share too with divorce. We have to restore the family. That's one of the reasons I wrote my book. Because I was talking to a man who's an assistant warden at a prison, and he said that over 90% of their young men who are incarcerated there come from fatherless homes. Is that not a tragedy, ladies and gentlemen, when we know these statistics? Not only that, let me just tell you a couple of things that really bother me. I cannot believe that a grown man would call up an elementary school and come and ask if they could dance provocatively for drag queen hour in front of their first and second graders. This is a state of depravity, right? But worse than that, you have many elementary schools saying, sure, come on in. And this is a horrible thing, especially in light of, think about this, America used to be number one in education. Hey, Tom, I get better as I go. I'm just warming up, Tom. Come on, man. So anyway, but think about that. We were number one at one time, right? Today we're like slouching towards a third world government, like number 38. It's so wrong. We pay so many taxes for this, and it shouldn't be. And so we have to advocate for education because we want our kids to compete in a world economy, a global economy, and we want them to prosper. So anyway. Okay, I'm glad you said that. I didn't know you guys couldn't hear. Maybe I asked you to raise your hand if you couldn't hear, so you probably didn't want me to speak. You didn't want to hear my speech, but now joke's on you. So a couple of things. But here's my daughter. Our daughter used to teach at a college political philosophy, and she reminds me of something. She says, Dad, it's just not the drag queen hour. She says much of education, modern education today, is laced with a Marxist rhetoric designed to separate the child from the parent and make the child a ward of the state, just like they've done in communist China and in Russia, ladies and gentlemen. And so we have to be active, vigilant, and involved in our communities. Even if our kids are growing, we're still paying taxes, and we have a duty to help those kids in those failing schools. I think one of the things I'd like to do, or they do it in Arizona, the money follows the child. And you know what? It makes everybody more competitive. All boats rises and floats. And then there's one more thing that bothers me, and this is just something that the man bothers me. I'm not a fan of Joseph Biden for some reason. Go figure why. But anyway, these are one of the things that keep me up. We've got people like Iran who says they want to nuke us. The crazy man in North Korea, Russia, China killed their own people. And for some reason, I don't think those leaders over there fear Biden. Do you? So anyway, that bothers me, but I'll move on. But on second thought, I won't move on. Here's just a little advice to you. If you find any of your friends who want to vote for Joe Biden, you want to put the fear of God into them like Joe Biden does to us, and you look at them, you stare at them, you say one word. You ready? Don't. So anyway, I know he scares me when he says that. So anyway, solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give a couple of solutions. The first one I want to give, it's a conditional promise, right? And it's from Samuel Adams, the father of our Revolutionary War. Great man. He says, we shall never be abandoned by heaven while we act worthy of its aid and protection. Those 4 words, while we act worthy. In other words, we have a duty to act worthy to have heaven's protection. And that falls in line with 2 Chronicles, right? You guys know the one. If my people are called by my name, if we do X, Y, and Z, repent from our sins and turn, God does want to heal our land. That's what gives me hope. But again, I want you to remember, it's a conditional promise if we do those things, right? And then we've got to encourage others to do those things, starting with our pastors in our churches who are a little bit user-friendly, seeker-sensitive, culturally relevant, and are afraid to talk about the issues of our day. we want to believe in those ancient texts. And another thing too, since it's conditional, that's my number one thing to a solution to our country. But the number two thing goes hand in hand. That's we have to restore our political principles of limited constitutional government back to their rightful place in American life. And here's why. It goes hand in hand with these scriptures. It doesn't talk about day of the government. It talks about we the people. This was meant to be a government of, by, and for the people. The founders would have had more of a problem with the people voting for the wrong people than they would have the politicians. And a lot of people think we need to do one or two things. Let's do term limits and everything's going to be okay. We've had term limits in California for over 20 years. Guys, have things gotten better? You know, see, here's the problem. Freedom is not an easy 1-2 punch or a 1-2 step. We have to fight and advocate for the rest of our lives until God takes us out of here, right? So we've got a lot of work to do. And besides, by the way, we should read the Constitution because the founders did put term limits in there, and they were referred to as elections. And every 4 years, we can get rid of our governor if we don't like him. So Lord willing, we'll get somebody good in there. So those are some of the things I wanted to remind you of our Constitution, that it is we the people. And Reagan said something really good. He says we have to remind those politicians that they're our servants, no longer our masters. And that's something that all of us have to be doing. So number three, people have asked me as I spoke all over California, what do I do? You know, being involved here is a great thing. You can get involved with campaigns, election integrity, put up signs, knock doors, walk precincts. But what's the thing, something that all of us can do? Because not all of us want to put up signs or knock doors, right? And here's my conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, where maybe we've dropped the ball and we can get better. Words are important. When we're silent, it only emboldens evil. And here's what I want you to know. The politically correct movement has been around for thousands of years, and whenever it sticks its ugly head up, it means they know they cannot win the argument. Therefore, what they have to do is blame and accuse us and put us down, so we shut up. And since there's a lot of people of faith in here, what do? We shut up. You know, a lot of times I'm talking to a lot of people since I wrote the book Restoring the Family that have difficulty talking to their adult children, you know, about these things. And we should never be timid. Evan Burke said, evil will only triumph when good men do nothing. And so as good men and women in this room, we have a duty to do these things. So the bottom line is, this PC movement means there's hope for our sides, but we have to get real good at communicating and making the case to win on these things. Next thing I want to talk about, when we talk about speaking well and using our words appropriately, is I want to just share with you, I've tried to study the difference between a politician and a statesman. And a statesman throughout history will usually take on the most difficult issues, right? Churchill in the 30s read Hitler's book Mein Kampf, and so he made a case that we had to get rid of Hitler. But the British people were tired of World War I, death and destruction, so they gave him the boot and brought in Chamberlain, the compromiser. Churchill would speak to groups as small as 5 or 10 people, 30 people, up and down the British Isles. Well, Chamberlain was making peace treaties with Hitler. When he finally made one with Hitler, giving Czechoslovakia away, 3 weeks later, Hitler invades Czechoslovakia, and now he's on his way to Great Britain, and you know he did bomb Great Britain during the London Blitz for 57 nights. But guess who finally the British people called back in the service? It drafted back in. It wasn't Chamberlain, it was Sir Winston Churchill, right? And so that's because he was powerful with his words and he didn't compromise on principles. Another one too that I like to talk about, what's that? Oh, thank you. Hey, I thought you were sending me a tip or something like that. Anyway, hey, Abraham Lincoln. Think about Abraham Lincoln. In 1857, Dred Scott was a slave, made his case all the way to the Supreme Court, and they ruled he's going to remain a slave. And so now this is the law of the land, and Reagan runs the next year for the U.S. Senate against Stephen Douglas, and he makes that centerpiece of his campaign, and he loses a campaign. 2 years later, Lincoln comes back, runs for president of the Republican Party, and a lot of them didn't want him because they wanted to win the presidency, and this had been a losing issue, right? So it wasn't one round of vote or two, but it took 3 rounds of votes for Lincoln to finally secure the nomination. And he secures the nomination. He goes on to end slavery and be the greatest president ever. But here's what I want you guys to know, because this is happening to my Republican Party right now. And so I found a note that Lincoln wrote to a congressman. And it has to do with even today, because you're hearing in polls we're losing on certain things, right? But see, the greats don't listen to polls. They do what's right. And so Abraham Lincoln writes this note and says, have nothing to do with popular sovereignty. What that means in today's language is don't listen to polls. In his days it was don't listen to the press. Have nothing to do with popular sovereignty. Then Lincoln goes on to say the reason why is right makes might. And so the thing is we're on the right side of history. Lincoln was on the right side of history. People didn't want him, but eventually he won because he knew how to make those arguments and he knew how to make the case, and he got people to see things according to the laws of nature and nature's God, that there is self-evident truth and that slavery was wrong. And he believed, as Jefferson earlier said, that if God hadn't intended man to be slaves, he would have had them been born with saddles on their backs to be booted and spurred. And so only the greats will speak out, and that's what we have to do. We can no longer be timid or shy because all the marbles are on the line. Wouldn't you guys agree with that? Okay. A couple other things too is I just want to share. I think there's hope because or no, let me go on. The next foundational principle is my book. I forget, Restoring the Family, right? A strong family. You can clap on that one. Thank you. A strong family will make for a strong America. And I just want you to know, I didn't write this like, you feed your kids 3 times a day or anything like that. What I wrote, it's a book for anybody. We need to instill virtues into our life. I need to instill them in mine. You need to instill them in yours. So I kind of looked around and saw what's happening in popular culture. Younger generation really lacks a lot of gratitude. And then I got thinking about it. I said, so does my generation. We live in a great country. We have food, roof over our heads. And so I wrote about gratitude, and I stood on the shoulders of like the Greeks, Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates. I looked to the religious community and stood to their shoulders of Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, C.S. Lewis, and others to try to, how do we best instill virtues in our life like gratitude? And so what it is the gratitudes build upon each other. And I talk about these things because I want to make sure our kids and our grandkids, as well as us, that we still instill as many virtues in our life, because I think we're going to have some rough seas, and we want to make sure we can survive those and, Lord willing, even thrive during those times. And part of that is making sure our soul is in proper order. And so I talk about these things, and on marriage, I talk about gratitude, morality, I talk about finances, don't get into debt, that sort of thing. I like what Will Rogers once said, that many Americans, we buy things with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. Isn't that a great thing? So as I get in my Maserati today, I don't want any judging eyes. I only have 490 payments left. So, and also I got 2 chapters on education. The classical education believed that education was integrating the intellect with the soul. And so I really hit education real well, how we should educate our children, and the best way that's done it. And again, I stood on the shoulders of people who possess a superior wisdom like Morrell, which that's not hard. You think it would be with my 7 years of high school, but and I also have 2 chapters on politics. One is defending freedom, and what is a father's duty to defend freedom. My dad fought in World War II, was shot once, had malaria twice, and was more afraid of mosquitoes than he was bullets. But I asked him, I said, why didn't you just wait to get drafted instead of signing up? He says, because I was fighting for you. And I said, oh, I wasn't even born then. And he goes, you don't get it. He says, that's what men do who love their country, you know. And so anyway, I hope you'll pick up some of these books. I'd be grateful. Let me start kind of winding down some of my thoughts. Who here has heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer? A lot of you guys, yeah, figures. You guys read good stuff. So Dietrich was a young pastor from Germany, but was in 1939 in New York at a seminary. But he believed that the duty of a person of faith is to be where the flames are the hottest. So he chose to return to Germany and fight in the resistance army against Adolf Hitler. He was captured and tortured and placed into prison. And 3 weeks before the Allies liberated these prisoners, Hitler personally had him executed. But again, his words rang true. We belong where the flames are the hottest. So let me ask you this. Out of the 50 states, perhaps, where does California rank, in your opinion, as one of the hottest places? So, yeah, we're up there. But my point is this. Look at, why are we running? This state has, as they say, great weather, the ocean. We've got everything going for us. Agriculture, fishing, swimming, everything, right? We should draw the line in the sand, plant the flag. We shouldn't be the ones leaving. And so if you have not U-hauled it out of here yet, perhaps you're here for a purpose. Because it is said, as California goes, so goes the nation. And so perhaps we've been placed here by Providence to stand in the gap. And also, I believe it's a duty to serve, you know. And so we want to be a good example. We want to show our kids and grandkids that we stand up for what's right, you know, even till our last day here. Wouldn't you guys agree with that? So thank you. So let me share, there are some bright spots. First time in history since I've been alive, we've got parents all over California returning to school board meetings. Do you guys realize that? And a couple of these guys I know, the Temecula group of guys and the Chino Hills group of guys, yeah, Bob out there, they're doing a good job. And you know, they're doing such a good job that Gavin Newsom is fining those school districts $1 million because they're removing books that are really inappropriate. And I'm not a prude. These books are just horrible. You should be learning to, you know, we're 38th in math around the world, slouching to a third world government. We should concentrate on education, right? And rather than indoctrination. And so that's a bad thing. So there's stuff that's happening. You know, perhaps God is on the move. I don't know. We've got a long ways to go. But people are also returning to city council meetings. College campuses, there's a lot of good stuff happening to them. I always worry about pastors sometimes. I wish they get involved. But I've had over the last few years about a lot of opportunities to speak at conferences or conventions of pastors. And I probably have had the honor to speak to maybe 13,000 pastors who want to get involved because they see what's going to happen to them. They're going to lose their 501c3, right? So perhaps things are winding up, and I believe that those things did right here in California. We could gain our state back, and so hopefully we can do those things. A couple other things too. Remember, Donald Trump got 3 constitutional judges appointed to the Supreme Court, right? That's not a bad thing. So, and also our son David had the honor of working at the White House as a White House attorney during the Trump years, the first 2 Trump years, and then he. One of the projects he did was to work on a team to try to find and vet judges who actually believed the Constitution. And his team got 237 constitutional judges appointed to federal benches throughout the United States. So we're not done yet, guys. There's a lot of life in us, and we're going to keep going. But think about the rich heritage California has. The only state with 21 missions. Think about that. World Vision, Focus on the Family, Campus Crusade, all founded here. The Azusa Street Revivals. I took my daughter on a father-daughter retreat up to Forest Falls, up near Big Bear, and there's a lake, and at the other side of the lake, there's a cross, and at the bottom of the cross, there's a plaque with the young man's name who actually went there years ago, and they dedicated that plaque to him because he believed that it was here in Southern California where God had him committed to preaching the gospel throughout the world. Do you know the name on that plaque? Billy Graham. Yeah, right here in California. California can take credit for Billy Graham. And then another thing too, which I get a little offended of, there's a really neat statue that when you walk up to the front door of the Capitol up in California, but they're hidden in the bushes, probably on purpose, is a statue of 3 nuns called the Sister of Mercy. So next time, look over to the left, look behind the bushes, and you'll see them. They had, on behalf of God, donated that land the Capitol sits on behalf of God. That's supposed to be our building, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll say this, not only was that our building, but this is supposed to be our state, or God's state in his country, and I'm convinced he wants it back, but it's up to us to step up and get it back to him. So let me close with one story, and it was a few years ago. David, our boy, also got to work for Clarence Thomas at the Supreme Court. So Joanie and I went back there, and Dave gave us the A tour, which was good. And then a little bit later, he says, "Hey, someone wants to meet you, so I want to take you." And he takes us into Justice Thomas's office, which was kind of cool. It was a cold, rainy January day, and he actually has a wood-burning fireplace, and he kept putting logs on. And so the way it starts off, Joanie and I sat down. The first question he asked me, he says, "Is David your son like you when it comes to money?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know what he was getting at." And I said, "Well, yeah." And then he says, "Well, the reason why is David thinks pennies are collector's items, So then he does another joke at my expense. Then the third joke, I thought maybe I'm going to start getting him back, but I want to be real careful, because he's a Supreme Court justice. But during our talk, I got up 3 different times to leave, and he said, "Sit back down." So Joanie and I, it was just something that's always going to be, etched in our mind. What an honor. We got to spend a couple hours, about 3 hours with the justice, But at the time, towards the end of the conversation, I wanted to ask him a question, but, I thought maybe it's not appropriate, but that's never stopped me before, right? So I said, "Justice Thomas, the night before you were confirmed to the Supreme Court, they ripped you apart." I said, "I would have told them to hang it." I said, because, and I looked it up back then, they paid the justices $160,000 a year, and I said, "You could have gone to a law firm and been a partner," because this is like 30 years ago, for $1 million. And he corrected me and said, "Well, actually, I was offered $2 million, And so I said, "Well, you could have taken the $2 million. And he said, "Well, the night before, Jenny and I," that's his wife, he said, "we sat down and we asked ourselves, do we love America?" And we said, "Indeed we do." Second question we asked, do we love America enough to die for her? And Jenny and I both said, "Indeed we do." He said, "Therefore, anything that comes our way, we shall endure." And so my message is here today. I don't know what's coming our way, but whatever comes our way, good, bad, or indifferent, therefore, whatever happens, ladies and gentlemen, our calling, we shall endure also. And all of God's people said, "Thank you for having me. Thank you very much."